All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 11:33 a.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. First and foremost, my name is Fred Steinman. I am an assistant research professor with the College of Business at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I am currently the Northern Section Director for the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. And on behalf of both the chapter and the Northern Section, it certainly is my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you that have taken the time to join us this morning and into the noon hour for kind of our wrap-up session of an ongoing series of online educational luncheons that the Northern Section and the chapter have been hosting over the last couple of months regarding the impacts of COVID-19 and the current pandemic on Northern Nevada, the state of Nevada, and various public and private agencies and firms throughout the state and region, as well as how COVID-19 has impacted the planning profession and public administration in general. We have quite the list of distinguished luminaries as part of our panel discussion today. Before I introduce our panelists as well as our moderator, just a couple housekeeping announcements. First and foremost, if you are not a panelist, please make sure that you keep your microphone muted. We will have time for Q&A and a larger whole group discussion once the panel discussion concludes in about 45 to 60 minutes. But for the time being, it'd be great if you can keep your microphones muted so we can get through the panel discussion without too much interruption. Also, just as a further FYI, this educational luncheon and special roundtable discussion is being recorded. We will complete and put together a video file that we will post on the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association's YouTube channel, where we have all of our educational luncheons from the previous couple months posted as well. Do encourage you, if you have not seen any of those past webinars, luncheons, to check out the chapter's YouTube page. Just go to YouTube and search for APA Nevada, and that way you can watch all the previous videos as well as this one once we're completed and it's posted. Also wanted to remind members of the American Planning Association who are attending this for AICP CM credits. This is worth 1.5 AICP CM credits. So please make sure that you self-report with AICP and the APA using the event number, which is available on the flyer that you should have received for this event. If you are having any difficulties self-reporting and getting your credits, please feel free to shoot me an email at fred, F-R-E-D, @unr.edu, and I'd be more than happy to help you ensure that you get those credits. One final kind of housekeeping announcement. The chapter's annual conference will be held on October 6th and October 7th of this year, so just in a few short months. We are going to be doing a full online conference this year. The save the date flyer has been posted on the chapter's website and the chapter's Facebook page, and registration for the conference should be open soon. So with all of that, now to kind of get into business, but before I launch the meeting today and introduce our panelists and moderator, first and foremost, it is certainly with a heavy heart that the chapter extends its sympathies to the city of Sparks, really to Northern Nevada and Nevada as a whole. Of course, many of you know the recent news. The mayor of the city of Sparks, Ron Smith, announced was passed away this morning after a prolonged battle with cancer. Ron was in every way a consummate professional and servant of the public trust and interest. And in days of hyper-partisan and craziness, Ron was one that could always thread the needle in finding the middle ground and bringing people together. And for that, both myself personally, and I know that many of us participating today, and of course the chapter as a whole, certainly will keep Ron, his family, and the city of Sparks, his colleagues and friends in our prayers as we mourn his passing. With that in mind, it's now my pleasure to start introducing our panelists. For those of you curious as to how we got here, this series and this panel discussion is, again, kind of the continuation of an ongoing conversation that several of us have had at the chapter on what the chapter and really how the planning community and our communities and organizations can take some lessons learned from the current COVID-19 pandemic to improve our organizations and make changes to the planning and public administration profession as well. The results of the last couple months of luncheons, as well as this roundtable discussion, will all be summarized and put together in a technical report that will be published through the University Center for Economic Development here at the College of Business at UNR. I'll be writing it along with Bob Webb, who will serve as our moderator, and Jeff Borchardt, who's one of our panelists. And then we'll also be presenting kind of a summary of all this work at the upcoming chapter conference, again, going to be held on October 6th and October 7th. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our individual panelists. First, Jeff Borchardt, Principal Planner with the City of Reno. Amy Cummings, the Deputy Executive Director and Director of Planning for the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County. Angela Foose, who was the former Director of the Northern Section of the Nevada Chapter of the American Planning Association, is now the Acting Community Director with the City of Reno. We also have Rodney Jorgensen, Senior Business Development Advisor with the Nevada Small Business Development Center, and a friend and colleague whose office is just one door down from mine on campus. Bringing up contributions from Southern Nevada, Sami Real, the Planning Manager for Current Planning with Clark County. Tim Thompson, the Planning Director for the City of Fernley. Doug Thornley, who is right now the outgoing or soon to be outgoing Assistant City Manager with the City of Sparks, just announced, received the offer from the City of Reno to be the next City Manager for the city. Congratulations, Doug. And then our final and certainly last but not least panelist from the City of Las Vegas, Marco Velotta, who's planning development and long-range planning with the city. With that, and of course, my thanks to all the panelists for agreeing to be with us today. I'm going to shut up now and hand over the reins to Bob Webb. Bob is a retired planning manager with Washoe County, a long-term member with the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. Bob, it's my pleasure to turn the meeting over to you. Have at it.
Thank you. So for the structure, just for all those who are signed in and attending, we have 8 panelists, and I will allocate about 5 minutes for each of the panelists. And the question that they're going to address is actually a threefold question. We want to have them do a reflection on the COVID pandemic and really its impacts and how it exposed vulnerabilities to their community, to their organization, or to the general structure that they work with. We also, once they think about that, the effect and impact of that, the pandemic and its restrictions. So what future actions will their organization or their community contemplate taking based on COVID restrictions? And those could be, for instance, continuing practices that were implemented, or perhaps changing practices based on a reflection of the pandemic and its restrictions. And the third part of the question is really a call to action. And this is really the meat of the matter, is where do we go from here? How can the experiences that each of their communities or their organizations underwent during the pandemic and its restrictions, how can that be magnified to help other organizations, other communities for future events, be they man-made or natural disasters? I'm going to run through each of the panelists alphabetically for another reason. That's the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to start off with Jeff Borchardt, who, just before he begins, I might also mention that Jeff just contributed an article to the latest edition of the chapter newsletter, which is available online. And it was specifically about this issue. So I encourage you to read that. And Jeff, go ahead, please start.
So I'm going to take this from a different point of view from my current position. Because before I joined the City of Reno, I was actually working for a large home builder. So this kind of got me thinking about, well, what are we going to do from a profession standpoint? We had started to see shifts in our sales. And so I started to see some writing on the wall to say, okay, well, what's going to happen to the industry as a whole? And then I started thinking, well, what's going to happen to planning as a whole? And I mean, we went from selling, I don't know, 13 to 15 houses a week, all the way to 0 throughout the month of March. So I started to get nervous and was like, okay, well, what is the behavior going to look like? And we really had to innovate at Toll Brothers on how we were going to drive sales. And so throughout the end of March, we started to look at, all right, how are we going to suspend spending in certain spots? Where are we going to look at certain key project sites? And how are we going to drive customer service in an era where we can't really be with a customer? And this was during the lockdown period. Luckily for us, construction was deemed an essential business, so we were able to continue forward. But on the lockdown side, from a sales standpoint, we had to innovate and create more virtual tours, work with buyers from a remote standpoint, whether that be FaceTime or creating video tours or doing a lot more electronic transfers of documents. It was a very difficult time for us, and we put in lots of hours to try to figure out how to make it happen, but we were forced to innovate quickly. This also got me thinking from an entitlements perspective, well, how can we improve from an agency standpoint? And I think I got to give the City of Reno credit, and not just because I work here now, but also because they really did a good job, and I know Angela will speak on this a little bit more, in converting a lot of their permits to electronic review, which did not slow down the process. It actually helped speed things up more so than it was before, in my opinion. There's still some room for improvements, and I've been talking with Marco on this a lot recently about how to convert our mapping system, which our local builders guy says that we do mapping the same way that we've done mapping since the Mark Twain days. And so we really want to try to move away from hard copy mapping and move into our electronic review, similar to the way that we're doing other permits and reviews. If we can try to get some signatures that way, it would help not only speed our process up, but advance this social distancing aspect. And so in my article, I also talked about, from our call to action, what are the ways that we can talk about how this is going to impact land use. And in my current position at the City of Reno, one thing that I really am passionate about is data-driven decisions. And so we're actually starting to figure out ways to track business licensing so we can determine how the land use, or how that impacts future land use decisions, and where we're not seeing a lot of businesses reestablished, where we're seeing businesses close and have non-renewals, things like that, so we can actually make sure that we're right-sizing our zoning inventory later on down the line. And so I think that's sort of the gamut of ping off of everybody else as they speak. Bob, you're still on mute.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I said that pretty much takes care of my current and future, but I'd be happy to hear from everybody else and sort of ping off of that. I know my article sort of addresses the early stages of COVID, even though it came out in the summer. I wrote it in March, and we've been having these series of discussions with every single aspect of that article, whether that be from the transportation side, the current planning side, and various different aspects of planning in general. So I'd be happy to hear from everybody else, and then we can kind of just play off of each other.
Yeah, you got about a minute left, but one thread I was going to pull for you was your reflection on the value of virtual conferences for developers.
Oh, yes. So a company as large as Toll Brothers, I think we had quite a few people who worked from all over the country. Our landscape architect was in Phoenix, our engineer was in Vegas, and architects were in Reno. And so we would have these conflicts of people having to travel all the time. And I know I handled a lot of different entitlement applications in Idaho. So I was traveling to Boise every 2 weeks. And so these virtual conferences are actually really helpful to continue forward from a development perspective, because you don't have to have all that travel time. Of course, in-person meetings are nice. You can take an actual piece of paper out and point to it and things like that. But I feel like the benefits that have come from these virtual meetings almost outweigh everything. You can get them faster. You don't have to book travel. It's cost savings for everybody, and it's extremely convenient. And I really appreciate them. I did several with Sparks, and they were amazing.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to move on to Amy Cummings, who's our Washoe County Regional Transportation Commission Director. So, Amy, please go ahead and start.
Hi, thank you so much. I am going to share my screen so I can share some photos of transportation projects. And I wanted to cover today with you and talk about how we are functioning as an organization during this time, how we're working with the public, and how this affects our projects and services that we offer. And I am so thrilled to be sharing a forum with land use planning because transportation, of course, is so interconnected with what happens on the land use side. We are serving a demand that comes from these other sources. So, of course, as an organization, we did shut down to the public to minimize the spread of COVID-19. We're continuing to have Zoom board meetings and advisory committee meetings. And we found that, especially with our Citizens Advisory Committee, it really has increased our participation. Even during 4th of July week, we're able to have a full quorum. This is something that we're going to want to continue because inclement weather will no longer be a factor in, requiring us to cancel meetings. So we may move towards a hybrid with in-person or remote for meetings like that in the future, but it has been an effective way to engage. People can still make public comments and we can hear those and make sure that our board and our advisory committee members are aware of those. And we're gradually starting to bring more people back into the workplace. Much of our work can be done remotely. And when folks are here in the office, they are asked to wear masks when they're outside of their desk area. But in short, all of our programs and projects and services are continuing on schedule as they would have under other circumstances. Community engagement is just the cornerstone of everything we do at RTC. And so this was a big adjustment for us. We traditionally would have multiple public meetings and workshops, every week typically, and we can't do that. We've shifted to fully remote, and we have remote public meetings, virtual workshops that are pre-recorded and online. There are online surveys where people can then give us feedback and share what they think and their ideas, their concepts. So we can still respond and incorporate that public feedback just as we always did. Another example is we would have had a big welcome back to Midtown celebration when we opened Virginia Street. Midtown construction is finished, but because we can't bring everybody together right now, we had a series of pre-recorded videos that were edited together by Lauren Ball and Michael Moreno here at RTC. And that's now, if you go to RTC's YouTube page, you can see that, and it's very exciting. You can see the before and after of Midtown. So here you see Neoma Jordan, Reno council member and RTC board member, sharing her enthusiasm to welcome people back to Midtown. So we've been very effective, increasing our participation in many ways with these virtual public events compared to what we did in person. I think it's something, again, that's going to stay as the supplement to in-person meetings when we're able to have those again in the future. Wanted to give everybody an update. I had a similar slide to this when I spoke a few months ago. And this is traffic patterns. So you can see in March when the shutdown occurred, traffic volumes, and this is on I-80 near the Spaghetti Bowl, downtown Reno. So traffic volumes fell by over 60% at their lowest. But now we've come back to within about 10% of pre-COVID traffic volumes. So I think traffic is here to stay. There's changes with the school times. I think that's helping us in terms of peak period congestion. But certainly people are wanting to get out and about and go about their business. We have some corridors such as 395 North, these corridors that really focus on our industrial, our warehouse, logistics and distribution centers, those employment areas. Traffic on some of those corridors has increased, is actually above what it was a year ago. So we're seeing traffic rebounding throughout the region. Our construction projects are on track. As I mentioned, Virginia Street in Midtown is opened up to two-way traffic a few months ahead of schedule, which we're thrilled about. Our work crews are out there wearing masks. They have safety protocols in place. But all of our construction projects are either on or ahead of schedule. What you see on the slide here with sidewalks under construction, that's on Sun Valley Boulevard. So we have projects going on all over the community, and those continue to be on schedule to make those improvements.
Amy, you got about 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
30, yeah.
Transit is still, we're welcoming people back to ride safely with RTC. Our operators are wearing masks. We ask the public to wear masks, and we're finding that we have 99.9% compliance, and we want to continue to thank people for doing that. Our flex ride service is continuing to do well. And in terms of long-term transportation issues, again, traffic volumes are coming back. We're hearing that bike shops can't keep any inventory, so there's going to be a growing demand for bike improvements and a growing demand for sidewalk spaces, public spaces where you can accommodate social distancing, have outside dining, outside shopping, things of that sort. And long-term, we want to see, and I want to hear from our other panelists, what long-term impacts are we going to see to downtowns? Because that, of course, is going to have a big impact on our transportation needs. And even we're seeing recent articles of people leaving the Bay Area and some other larger cities because they can now work remotely and they're coming to communities like Reno and Sparks. So thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing from all the other panelists.
Thank you, Amy. Perfect. So we're going to jump over to Angela Fuchs now with the City of Reno. So Angela, please take it away.
Hi. So I'm with the City of Reno, and when COVID first hit, it was, instant, like the water shut off. So our first reaction, I felt like we were in a MASH like triage unit where everyone's sent home, and how do we get people computers and remote access and phones, right? I mean, we are all dealing with that. So that was problem number one, is how do we function as a city and keep all of our services moving when we don't have the ability to be in the office anymore? Luckily, we have a great IT department that was very adaptable and got us all working remotely, most of us from our own personal laptops or computers. Same with cell phones, right? So a lot of our planners, they have to call the public back, and that's their personal cell phone number, calling the public back, which is never good. So we've had to figure out how to kind of navigate through that, and what is it, like star or pound 69 or whatever you do to block your call. So those are the challenges that we kind of like picked up along the way of, oops, things that we should have thought about before we started doing this, but we just didn't know. In terms of how did we keep City Hall functioning, we still had people that were submitting business license and planning applications and building permits and paying their sewer bill, but City Hall was shut down from an outsider perspective. So the first thing we did is we have security on the first floor. We set up only one way in for the public on the first floor, and everything on the second floor was basically bins with signs. So the public would come, they would come through security, they would go to the second floor, and they would drop off their plans in a bin. At some point during that day, staff would come out, move all of that stuff to an area for quarantine. We would quarantine everything for 24 hours because early on in COVID, we didn't know how contagious this was on paper. So we moved it to quarantine for 24 hours, and then we would start routing. All the managers were still working. So we were literally going out to the street and handing over building permit sets of plans to our staff in their car. It was a challenge, just because there's so many things that we do with paper that how do you pass that along to people that actually review? So ironically, the Friday before COVID hit, we released what we call our EDR, or our electronic document review. We've been working on this for a couple years, and literally the Friday before COVID shut everything down, we went 100% electronic document review. So it was really perfect timing. If COVID was going to hit, it was perfect for the city, if that's a thing. So we had the ability for people to submit all types of building permits electronically. The other challenge to that is, as staff, we weren't prepared to take in all of this electronic building permit. And if you can imagine being able to rule out large set of plans and reviewing versus now you're at home on a 9-inch laptop trying to review very complicated building permit plans. So a lot of people, bought cords and hooked up their computer to their large flat screen TV in their living room. It was just trying to do the best we can with what we had to work with. So we got through that, and then the Reno riots hit, and all of our windows on the first floor were shut out. So again, we had to go back and say, this isn't working. We cannot have people coming through the first floor anymore. That's all shut off. So we again came up with a new plan. We now have people coming through the second floor, so everything changed again. So all of that's just been a progression over the last 6 months, and we've adapted, and that's been great. Bigger picture, we are in what I would call now this recovery phase, and what can we do as a city to help the businesses in this next phase? So we started this initiative called Reno Reignite, and it was intended to say, okay, like how are businesses going to reopen with the governor's directives? How do you open with 50% capacity? How do you open a tiny restaurant that only has 10 tables and you can only have 50% capacity? And how do you financially stay open if this is the long-term answer? So we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, what can we do to help these businesses short-term? So we started allowing all kinds of outdoor uses. Outdoor retail is allowed, outdoor dining is allowed. Places that previously would have triggered a special use permit for those uses, we said temporarily during COVID, we will just allow those things. You don't have to go through any permitting. You don't even have to ask us for permission. Midtown is a great example of where this has been really helpful. Midtown is kind of a transitioning area. It had 18-inch wide sidewalks for many, many years. And luckily RTC was able to fast track that project. And now we have 10-foot wide sidewalks. But again, COVID came at the right amount of time, the right time to make all these things happen. So now we have these sidewalks and these tiny restaurants that can actually have outdoor dining on the sidewalk. So we're trying to be proactive. We do send staff out there to talk to the business owners, let them know that we do have an outdoor dining permit application. Again, anything they do in the public right away, we are liable for. So we have a process where they're going through that. We are waiving fees because we're trying to be business friendly. From a retail perspective, we are also allowing retail users to move outdoors. If you have a parking lot and you want to move your bikes outside during the day, you're more than welcome to do that.
Amy, you got about 30 seconds. 30 seconds, Amy.
Okay. So we're just trying to do things that are creative. It's all temporary in nature until COVID is over, and then we go back to normal. The other big things we're doing is just fee deferrals. Business licenses, we're deferring those fees short term. Construction hours is a big one. We do have some projects that have limited construction hours during COVID. We allow indoor construction 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the intent is that you can't have all these trades working in a building at the same time. OSHA has come and cited a lot of them. So this gives them more flexibility to actually have trades working times of the day and the week when they normally wouldn't be working. But from a planning and zoning perspective, we're giving them that option to do specifically during COVID.
Super. Okay. Well, thank you, Angela. And hopefully we'll come back to some of that. But I'm going to turn it over to Rod Morganson now. Rod's going to bring an entirely different perspective in because he's from the Small Business Development Center, and he'll talk to us a little bit about that. So please, Rod, take it away.
Yep. This is some of what I have to say will involve planning, but indirectly, if you would. From a small business perspective, what has happened to a lot of small businesses is that they are currently surviving off of the PPP and the idle money that they were able to gather. Restaurants at 50% capacity, bars still yet not open, reduction in volume for a lot of other businesses. What inevitably will happen, and I think it's going to happen to a good 30–40% of small business, is that they will run out of capital and will end up closing. So you will have locations around communities that are ripe for the next entrepreneur that has the capital to go in and reopen in those things, but that will be slow. And the reason it will be slow is because the majority of banks are really sitting back on their haunches at this point, rightfully so, and not really having any interest in financing newer business startups, if you would. In fact, some banks, again, rightfully so, they will entertain early stage business, but their expectation of how much capital you have and will have in reserve after you've launched the business will have gone up significantly. In other words, you want to open a business and you need to have $50,000 as your equity contribution in order to historically have a bank finance the balance. Now what's going to happen is the majority of banks are going to be saying, yeah, that's fine. That's all well and good that you have the $50,000, but we want you to have an extra $50,000 in reserve to cover 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of operating costs. If we get another catastrophe that occurs. So you're going to see access to capital diminish significantly. Although in the growing communities of northern southern Nevada, you would say, okay, there's always an opportunity for more retail and service because those communities are growing. But it's going to be ever more challenging for those enterprises to acquire the funding they need to open, even though they potentially could open in a place that closed that is perfect for them and is all set up, and the cost to start would be significantly reduced. The big things we saw initially were a lack of savings, if you would, from the small business sector. I know that's kind of hard to say because business owners have fairly small bottom lines. You know, they're trying to pay their bills, and to sit there and say, well, you should have 3–4 months worth of expenses set aside. That is in reality, that is what should have happened. And even in this case, 3–4 months worth of monthly operating expenses would not have been enough. So that's one of the big vulnerabilities. Those small businesses that I have seen that have not been as negatively affected were businesses that reacted immediately. In fact, possibly overreacted if you really felt that this was going to be a short-term pandemic. But those that kind of saw it coming and said, okay, I'd rather overreact than underreact. So I'm going to look at all of my operating expenses and I'm going to cut everything I possibly can cut, including human capital, at a very early stage, because I can always regroup if this is not long lasting. Those are the ones that are doing well now. As Angela had said, I was on the phone yesterday with a good friend, Bill Gilbert at Beaujolais Bistro, and Bill significantly expanded his outside seating. And so he has not, as a restaurant, a French restaurant, he actually has not seen a dramatic reduction in overall revenues because of the increase in outside seating that has allowed him to maintain the social distancing and yet survive. Now, because fall is coming on us, we are looking fall, we're not going to have as much outside seating. Now we're looking at the space right next door. Can we lease that to expand the footprint of the restaurant so that we can maintain the volume? And those small business owners, I think in the future, having done this now for 32 years, I think one of the things that we as counselors are going to have to focus on are, number one, adequate capital financing for something like this occurring in the future. Number two, convincing our clients that when something happens, react quickly so that you can survive it. Those are the big things that I have to bring.
Perfect, thank you. Right on time too, Rod. You must have your timer out. That's good. We're going to shift down south now to Sami Real, Clark County. So Sami, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Some of what I have to share is very similar to what you've already heard, but from Park County's perspective, what we faced when we came into the immediate shutdown was sending everybody home and basically stopping operations. And that forced us to think about what do we need to do in order to continue to support operations. Then it was determined that construction was still essential, so we had to modify our business. We had to put aside some of the projects that we were working on, internal projects in the short term, and then focus our efforts on how do we keep the economy going, how do we keep developers going, how do we keep property owners going through their processes and being able to open their business or continue to make improvements or construct their new house. The challenges that we faced is that we had processes that we were going off of that were essentially 20 years old. We still were doing in-person submittals. There was rarely anything that was taken electronically, and we weren't set up to do anything electronically besides email. So the immediate shift that we had to adjust to was, okay, since there are no in-person encounters, everything's by email. And we had some challenges with email size, capacity, and the type of documents that we were working through, but it worked. And that just opened the door to a lot of either naysayers, I would say both internally and externally, saying, oh, you can't give away our in-person meetings, to going, this actually works and this is nice. We can do business differently and we can do it maybe a little bit more efficiently, and we're getting a better review up front. So what we did is we modified our email process, and we now have a computer system where people are allowed to upload their application materials online. As I say it, it was probably 2 to 3 months of IT improvements that would have normally taken 2.5 years to do. And it has proven to be successful. I would say it's not perfect, but it is a huge leap forward to where we wanted to go and where we wanted to be for a while. And now we're at a place now where we can just make adjustments to perfect it and to expand it to more operations. The other adjustment that we had to make was public meetings. Public meetings for our Planning Commission, for our Board of County Commissioners, and then also public meetings that we were having for projects that we've started internally. We have a stadium overlay that we're working on. We just kicked off our comprehensive master plan update, and we didn't want to stop those projects. So we had to think of alternative ways of reaching out to stakeholders, of inviting this public participation process to happen while everybody was either working from home or we were limited on the number of people we could have at a meeting. And so we explored things like WebEx, we used Zoom, and for the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners, it was a challenge at first, and it still proves to be a challenge, which I think is why our board has elected to stop those types of meetings, because while there is a certain part of the public that is technology savvy enough to know how to work meetings, we have a IT side that is a learning experience for how do we make sure that people are only speaking once. We have the public participation of those that aren't technology savvy. So then we're getting criticized for not having an open process where the public can easily participate. And so we're still working through those challenges. Again, our Planning Commission and board meetings are not done virtually outside of what we already do, which is televise them on TV and over the internet. But we are looking into some ways where we can, or I guess what other solutions are out there that would allow us to do these virtual meetings successfully, and that would be easy for the public. And we plan on using some of the CARES Act should we find a program system that is workable. And then not only having that hopefully be applied to our planning commission and board meetings in the future, but also our meetings that we have for our town boards and our citizen advisory councils. We have to think about those as well. Again, another challenge to that is we have some areas of the community that don't have the type of bandwidth that would be needed for these virtual meetings. So it's really trying to think of how can we have a solution that works for everybody, but yet that takes into account some of the constraints of the different environments that we have within our county. The other.
Sami, we got about 30 seconds.
Oh, no problem. So I'm almost done. And then in terms of we've had to be flexible with our code application, again, wanting to support businesses and really thinking about what's important to us during this time of COVID, and then what would be important to us later, and then possibly looking at code revisions later on to address these things, but also to what subjects should we be addressing in our comprehensive master plan as we go forward, and then taking those suggestions to make us more resilient to situations like this in the future.
Thank you, Sami. Appreciate that. Hopefully, if I keep my time around, we'll have the opportunity to get back around to everybody. I'm actually going to just do a quick change up of people and jump to Doug Thornley. He, obviously, City of Sparks, needs to log off pretty quick because of the mayor's passing. So thank you, Doug, and take it away. You there, Doug?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
Sorry. So yeah, I think that's sort of emblematic. We've been doing this for 5 months now, and I still can't work the mute button reliably. I appreciate you guys accommodating my disaster of a schedule today. So for the planning group, I think that in general, everybody can sort of accept that the planning side function of the house leads to community character. But one of the things in Washoe County that I think has been really successful through this is sort of the uniform approach to business regulation and making sure that applications could still come in and that we could still get these things processed. And we've done it in largely the same way across Reno and Sparks and Washoe County. And that has led to, at least my understanding from the businesses I've spoken to, is a stable environment for them to continue operating, or at least an accepted understanding of how the regulations were going to be applied to them, which they've been grateful for. What it's really revealed to me are sort of a couple of things that maybe aren't planning specific, but then sort of do lead into how you're going to structure master planning and where you're going to target efforts for economic development. So the first is, in Sparks at least, we were not super prepared to go to a completely remote workforce. And I think that you've heard concerns expressed by all the panelists as to how to scale that up quite so quickly, and everybody's gone through, I think, largely the same growing pains. So I don't want to continue to beat that same drum and have everybody get the same message over and over again for our time together. But one of the things that focusing on in Sparks, I expect everybody is focusing on is what things are we going to keep coming out of this, in terms of what virtual processes are we going to keep, which are we going to encourage in terms of online plan submittal, and these virtual meetings for plan review. Which things can we automate? Which things do we need a human body working on because of sort of the personal nature of planning, versus something that perhaps is a little more ripe for automation, like business licensing, particularly on the renewal side. That said, I think the pandemic has sort of revealed not that it needed revealing, but it has really sort of underscored the importance of diversifying the economy. I think you can see that play out in real time with how Northern Nevada has fared versus Clark County. And so as we go through the process of targeting economic development in our respective regions, I think it's important to keep in mind what that sort of brings to bear in terms of stability on the fiscal side, when things like this happen, because I don't need to tell anybody on this call the unique nature of Nevada's governmental revenue streams. They're fickle, right? And little bumps in the road create big waves and large scale problems for government agencies. And so sort of building that base and paying attention to where we're targeting industries and how we're supporting those industries in our master planning and our zoning processes, I think is particularly important. And these events have done nothing but sort of bring that into sharp relief, at least from my seat. So I'm sure I'm not out of time, but those are my overall thoughts on the matter.
No, and you're actually doing good. You have a little bit of time left. So since you're going to leave us, sadly, for circumstances I'm sure you don't, what would be your one thought? If you had to distill everything down and leave one thought to our broader audience who's watching, what would that be for thinking ahead? I know you touched on some. What would that be, one that kernel?
You know, I think the thing that really jumps out at me that I spend an awful lot of time thinking about from an operations side right now is that in Sparks, and I suspect for a lot of government agencies, we've sort of been forced into this acceptance of remote work and doing things that have been done on the private side for years and years and years. And that's exciting for me, right? I think that we've seen efficiencies. You heard Jeff touch on it. You heard Angela touch on it. These things that hadn't been done on the public side, at least in Washoe County, we're sort of embracing, and we're going through the growing pains sort of out of necessity rather than choice, but we're learning how to do it, and that will provide a much broader palette of options in terms of how we're going to handle these processes moving forward. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is that it offers up a new way to allow employees to get out of the office, and I think that present circumstances notwithstanding, that will help contribute to an improved morale as we come out of this, and we learn that remote work is super possible in a lot of these functional areas, and it can be a thing that we can afford our employees the option of using.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Doug. And again, congratulations on the new job. I'm looking forward to seeing you take the helm out there.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So we're going to switch over, but before I do that, I would remind the panelists that we have two more, not panelists, participants. We have two more panelists that we're going to go through, but I encourage you to start thinking about your questions. You can either use the chat functionality at the bottom to type out your question and line them up, and then Fred will go through there, or we'll turn it over for people who have questions. But right now, I want to jump back to Tim Thompson, City of Fernley. So Tim, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Bob. So Fernley faced many of the same challenges that the other jurisdictions did, Reno, Sparks, and Clark County. Being a staff of 65, serving a population of 20,000, it might have been a little more challenging for us. So I think being able to adapt was critical for us. We did a lot of sitting back and watching what other jurisdictions were doing to see if we could learn from them. I think that there was some thought on our part that this pandemic would be temporary and we would be right back to business as usual, and clearly that's not the case. But focusing in on our vulnerabilities, really I think the primary vulnerability was our workforce, our employee well-being, their physical and mental health. Childcare became somewhat of an issue, and the realization that we are just as susceptible as anyone else. And then even in the midst of a pandemic, our citizens still required some level of service. And so it was very important for us to take care of our employees. Our overall response, I think, could be viewed as a vulnerability as well. Some folks were happy, some were not. Obviously, the mask mandate has kind of highlighted that. But it really opened the city up to criticism, although we did our best. And I think it highlights a level of mistrust between the public and their government. Public engagement was something else that I think was a struggle, but I think it also provided some positive opportunities for us. There were certainly some pros and cons. There were new ways to interact with the public. We were able to refine existing social media outreach. But being a more rural community, there are still a lot of folks out here that prefer to interact in person. The public engagement, I think, has probably been most challenging when we're dealing with Planning Commission and City Council and public hearing items. We had a member of the public that showed up just a couple weeks ago at a City Council meeting because they felt they wanted to speak to the council in person, but unfortunately they were not allowed in because of the governor's directive. So that's been a real challenge for us as well, and I don't know that that serves us well as we try to gain additional trust with our citizens. Other vulnerabilities were supply chain issues, our ability to obtain PPE, cleaning supplies, and other provisions. Technology, I think, was a very significant challenge for us. Mostly hardware, such as microphones and cameras for virtual meetings. Many of us did not have those. In fact, the camera I'm using today is my personal camera. It was difficult to integrate this new technology in with our existing technology, particularly in the council chambers. We really struggled and I think lagged behind some of the other jurisdictions in implementing virtual meetings. I think over the last month or so, we've come a long way we've gotten some equipment that will hopefully allow us to do these virtual meetings in a better manner than what we did previously. And then our budget, you just heard Doug use the term fickle. Our revenue sources in Nevada can be volatile. When you're talking about property taxes and not having that backstop. The Great Recession, we saw property values significantly drop. And then the consolidated tax, the retail tax, that's really incumbent upon folks having discretionary income to buy taxable goods. And so those sources of revenue, which are the primary sources of revenue for most governments in Nevada, are very volatile and make it challenging for us to continue to provide those kinds of services. As we look ahead, some of the things that we're doing is really amounts to contingency planning. We're in the process of upgrading our technology. We received almost $4 million in CARES Act funding. A good chunk of that is going towards our technology and fortifying our ability to work remotely. We're also, we have and continue to create protocols that can be implemented or re-implemented on a moment's notice. And then cross-training our staff. As I mentioned, a staff of 65, it was important that folks know what other folks do and what their functions were, and to try and cross-train some of those. And then we hope to realize some lasting efficiencies. The virtual meetings has been talked about already today, and we've seen great success with that. Once we've acquired the equipment and really got back on the horse, so to speak, and continued on with the planning processes, those virtual meetings have been very beneficial. They're more efficient. We've seen increased participation, and I think they're just more convenient for a lot of folks. Again, being rural, somebody may not want to drive 30 minutes to an hour from Carson City to Fernley to come to a 30-minute meeting. So those have been, that's been a real success for us, and we continue to learn and move that forward. And then as far as lessons learned, I think communication is really the key, both internal and external. We spent a lot of time communicating with other government agencies and stakeholders and communicate that to our citizens and to our staff as well, and keep everybody in the loop. Our belief was that our employee health should be paramount. If we would be unable to provide service to citizens without having a healthy staff. Certainly, we've heard the term empathy lately, and having empathy and understanding where people are and perhaps putting yourself in their shoes for a moment. And then we now have adequate supplies on hand as far as PPE, cleaning supplies, and other provisions go. So those are really the lessons learned moving forward. And that's all I have for now.
Okay, well, appreciate that. Thank you. So, as was said earlier, last but not least, Marco Velotta, down in the city of Las Vegas. So please, Marco, take it away.
Thank you. I'll echo quite a bit what the others have said. Witnessing the region and state's economic and community systems shut down is really indicative of the pandemic not solely being a public health crisis. You know, I rode my bike down the Strip and into downtown Las Vegas, and it was eerie seeing no cars and no people, and the fountains of the Bellagio shut off. And you know, in mid-April, it was about that point when the NFL draft was supposed to be taking place here, and that would have attracted the same, about the same size population as Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County. So, you know, from the city standpoint, you know, understandably, we're in the spotlight, you know, because we're Las Vegas, and we definitely get the media attention and the headlines, and that's a reality that comes with the territory, and that does apply to any community, but the magnitude and scale does vary. In general, from an operational standpoint, you know, we've had to make those same adjustments that everybody else has. You know, the tricky balance to open, of being open for business and, you know, being a 21st century virtual municipal government. You know, we had to do the quick innovations like transition to online meetings, you know, work from home, distance operations, helping customers virtually, things like that, doing electronic things for getting business taken care of. You know, doing city council and planning commissions virtually, and adapting a new process for public comments. You know, the CARES Act and you know, definitely helped during the, you know, budget making process for FY20 and 21, you know, especially for first responders. You know, and we were able to do some things, you know, specific to our operations, you know, doing a testing and treatment center for our homeless operation, and having a compliance program for code enforcement and business licensing operations to get compliance with the governor's directives. I'm going to shift over to long-range planning here. You know, we're winding down development of a long-range master plan for the next 30 years, and this was a concurrent effort that we were doing online with Lead for Cities, which would certify the city, and that's something we actually just announced this morning. So we were able to make a lot of assessments with respect to populations and different systems across the city. And so from a community standpoint, you know, the pandemic has really exposed, you know, our reliance on gaming and tourism, and it really exemplifies that need for continued economic diversification. And there's a lot of other community issues, you know, that affect us, you know, from a day-to-day standpoint. You know, the personal impacts on physical and mental health, the impacts to financial health, you know, the looming impact to housing and overall housing affordability, you know, the directives that are in place, you know, the limits to public gathering, the closure of businesses and public health mandates. I mean, all of those things are new and things that we have to adapt to. Childcare and education, you know, that it's one thing for school districts to be getting into virtual learning for UNR and UNLV and our community colleges, but it's vastly different for elementary schools and preschools, you know, and for those that have kids and work as well. You know, the cancellations of conventions and special events like CES, and you know, our $2 billion new stadium for the Raiders that's going to be empty for the NFL season. You know, the impacts to travel and transportation. You know, the flights into both, you know, Reno Tahoe and McCarran Airport are a fraction of what they were a year ago. The impact to public transportation, as Amy mentioned, and then those corresponding impacts, as has also been mentioned, to the C-tax. So our master plan, you know, it really has this overall comprehensive look, and we do have this requirement in NRS for a safety element. And as we developed our 2050 master plan, which we're close to releasing as a draft for public comment, you know, we looked at how safety and public health relate to our guiding principles of equity, health, resilience, livability, and innovation to really guide that goals development. So we assessed hazards and risks based on information that we have from our health district and from the Clark County All Hazards Mitigation Plan, developed a framework that considers adaptive capacity and sensitivity of all these systems to determine community risk and vulnerability. So, you know, when you apply that to the likelihood and probability of occurrences of different hazards, whether they're natural or man-made, the impact to the critical functions of the community, and the extent that citizens and businesses can be effective, you know, we can develop specific recommendations, you know, specific to mitigation and prevention, adaptation to the hazard itself, immediate response plans, and then probably most importantly for us right now, the recovery aspect of it. You know, we also looked at public health and the public health system. You know, that's a goal section that, you know, given the, you know, that was done during, prior to the pandemic itself, we did get a lot of good data that we hadn't done in previous iterations of our master plan, dating back over the last 20 years. So in general, we now know, the city's public health infrastructure, and we know that we need a lot of improvements. Our northwestern area of the city is medically underserved, and we know that we need additional hospital capacity and ICU beds, citywide. Our Central Valley and the downtown area has medically underserved populations, especially for low income and Latino and Black populations. And we definitely need more doctors and nurses, and the UNR School of Medicine, UNLV School of Medicine, that they definitely help with that. Specifically for us, UNLV School of Medicine is a real game changer for downtown Las Vegas, and it's definitely one of those economic development sectors that we want to get ourselves further developed.
You get about,
so
about 30 seconds, Marco.
Okay, yeah. So our key actions and goals are really to develop these hazard prevention, mitigation, and vulnerability frameworks that apply to all hazards, whether it's infectious disease or other things that are specific to our region, and continue making those infrastructure investments and really develop a comprehensive recovery framework that's context sensitive and adaptable to a variety of scenarios. And then from an operational standpoint, increase, things like funding reserves and rainy day funding, easier said than done, of course. And I'd leave off with, if there's one thing, one lesson learned or a takeaway, it's to collaborate. The governor's directives in our recent special sessions may have addressed, some impacts, but I'd expect in the 2021 legislative session that we'll have more gaps that we need to fill, especially those that, we'll confront soon and we'll learn from between now and February.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Wanted to, as a part of this, we have a great group of panelists, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and hopefully there'll be some questions. So I'm going to rely on Fred to help me with this because I don't know how to do this. But anyway, let's open it up first for questions from the participants out there.
We have a question from Scott Carey via the chat box, specifically from Scott to Marco. How do you think the economic impacts and agency budget cuts related to the pandemic will impact sustainability efforts throughout the state moving forward?
Thanks, Scott. I think it's something that we can capitalize on as a sector to further develop, with respect to other policies that have been enacted prior to the pandemic, the state renewable portfolio standard expanding 50% by 2030. That's something that, we could continue to build itself out. And that, has a different funding mechanism behind it and a different requirement that doesn't necessarily involve local governments. We're continuing to make investments in clean energy and sustainability here at the city. We have LEED buildings that are being constructed, our new fire station, new municipal court in downtown. So we're continuing to do that, and I expect that with the county's new Office of Sustainability and some of the other efforts going on with Henderson, North Las Vegas, and the region as a whole, there will continue to be that momentum no matter what the conditions are with respect to the pandemic.
Anyone else from the panel want to talk about sustainability from your perspectives?
Quiet bunch.
Well, the next question from ILN, again in the chat function, open up to anyone on the panel. Did any of the organizations you represent implement a formal continuity of operations plan? And was it useful?
Anybody?
Hi, this is Amy. I can add that RTC Washoe does have a continuity of operations plan. It's geared more towards natural disasters more than pandemics. So it's structured so that in an emergency or flood, we could move key staff to a remote location. So now I think we can update that and have a new element of remote work for many of our staff. And of course, much of ours addresses our transit operations as well. which was not impacted as significantly through this as it would have been through other types of disasters that are in our operations plan.
Anybody else want to tackle that one? I was going to mention really briefly that prior to leaving Washoe County, I was intimately involved in their continuity operations plan, and just out of curiosity, after the pandemic took hold, I just happened to chat to the planning and community development director for the county about how did that work? How did the co-op plan work? Interestingly enough, is when the actual order came down to shut down the county building, the planning director was gone, as was the planning manager. So a senior planner had to step in and do everything that you chatted about. And sadly, the continuity operations plan was kept on the shelf. Nobody looked at it. And I think that was more a question of making sure that not only the people like myself who worked on it, but more importantly, everybody in the organization understands what that continuity of operation plan says, their role in it, so they have the ability to pull it out and say, okay, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Somebody actually thought about what we needed to do when we shut down the county complex at 9th and Wells, and where are those people to go, and how are we going to use technology to supplement it. So that was my reflection on their conversations. We have a couple more questions, and I'll turn it back over to Fred.
From Alex Murphy, there have been a lot of focus on protecting the physical health of employees throughout this pandemic. What efforts have your agencies pursued to maintain the mental health of your employees? And open to everyone.
I'll take that one. So in Fernley, we talked a lot about our employee health, both physical and mental, and we've engaged our employees very closely. So for myself, I have a staff of 2, and I regularly meet with them, and we talk about we just talk about things in general, the pandemic, how it's affecting them, what they might need from the city in order to be able to continue to perform their jobs. I have one member in particular that, with school starting, may have a childcare issue. And so we've been working through what that looks like in the coming months, and how they can continue to contribute to the city and still function and not get bogged down by playing, parent, teacher, employee at home, and not having the luxury of going to work. So we've done that, and we've I think consistently shared EAP information with our employees and encouraged them to talk to folks if they felt the need. So we've recognized that is a critical aspect of taking care of our employees as a whole.
Angela, I think you were just going to chime in. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to add, we've been really flexible on the return to work plan. In general, we're trying to have people come to work, but kind of on alternating shifts, so that we don't have, 2 people that are in a cubicle next to each other on the same day. I think that has actually helped just people's morale to be back in an office setting. And then we have another handful of people that don't feel comfortable coming back to work yet because of COVID or maybe some personal health reasons. And so we're being very, very flexible and trying not to just say everyone, one size fits all. We're really looking at each case on an individual basis. We're also doing we have an interim acting city manager right now, and he does live chats where I think they're every couple of weeks. You can send in an anonymous question, and it could be anything, and he answers these questions on these citywide chats. So we're getting a lot of questions like what's the city going to do with budget cuts? Are we talking about furloughs? I don't feel safe coming back to work. How do I talk to my manager about that? So really I think it's been good because they're anonymous questions. And so we get a lot of people that maybe don't feel comfortable going to their manager, but now, the city manager is the one that's answering it citywide. So I think it's a good just precedent to set that everyone's getting the same direction from the top down.
Excellent. I'm going to put Rod Jorgensen on the spot. Rod, you have a unique perspective of working with faculty and students, and clients external to the organization. In terms of morale and mental health, any insight into that?
We've looked at mental health from an external perspective, in that we realize that in the coming months, we're going to be dealing with a lot of emotional small business owners that are trying to survive. So we've already had mental health professionals speaking to our counselor group, trying to give us tips as to how to interact with clients on that basis. Also, unrelated to what you said, we've also had one attorney that has come on to our counselors' weekly meeting to talk to us about bankruptcy law. And we're going to have another because, unfortunately, I'm usually a glass half full guy. Unfortunately, I can kind of see bankruptcies ramping up over the next 6 to 12 months. We haven't had any real internal. Most of our statewide counseling staff, are still, they're all glass half full type of individuals, and we haven't had to have the heart-to-heart conversations quite yet with small business owners. It'll come.
Thank you. Hey, Fred, just real quick, 2 things. I wanted to draw everybody's attention to a chat from INL, which is Irene Mavis, about support with mental health resources for employees. See the nvhealthresponse.nv.org, and also another email link. And she offered that if you have questions about COVID health response or need response or recovery plan resources, to contact her, and she has her contact information there. So thank you very much, Irene. What I was going to also mention to our panelists, to give them a heads up, the last 10 minutes, I'm going to ask each of you to give the one takeaway that you want to have all the participants remember. And I'm going to actually start backwards with Marco and work my way to the front. So that last 10 minutes, and I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. So Fred, back to questions, please.
As Sami is thinking about her takeaway, a question from Scott Carey for Sami specifically, and I think, this could apply to other organizations involved in their master planning efforts. But Sami, if you want to kick this off, do you anticipate any new or unique changes to the county's master plan that have come about as a result of the challenges faced during this pandemic?
We do. We're really early on in the update of our comprehensive master plan, and we're just compiling all of the data that we've received from all the stakeholder outreach and a survey that we had online. And we recognized early on, again, the kickoff was happening the same time as we entered into the pandemic, the COVID shutdown. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we do know that we will have something about, whether it be pandemics or just an expansion of this natural hazard that has happened, and how we can be more resilient as a county when it comes to that. Marco mentioned diversity in economies. It's really important. We are seeing land getting eaten up by residential developers that have been slated for commercial or industrial development. Well, that development is necessary to balance out the economies of Clark County. And I would say, I'd even go to venture and say, as wide as the state. So we recognize that we need to focus our efforts and have goals and have policies that do address some of the outcomes, the results, or the impacts of what we're currently experiencing.
Wonderful. I think related to that, and another question from Anna Marie Smith, and Sami or anyone can take this. Have any of your organizations engaged your planning departments in ongoing recovery planning efforts?
I think Angela, on our end, touched on the Reignite Reno aspect, a lot of which community development is a part of. So planning's playing a role in current planning efforts to help dig out. And as I mentioned, we're also looking at data-driven decisions in the future from a planning perspective to make sure that, to Sami's point, we have the right zones for the right recovery. So that's, at least on our end for the City of Reno, planning is extreme.
Well, Marco, I think you were about to jump in.
Yeah, City of Las Vegas, again, I mean, tied back to our master plan, we have had that collaboration with some of our other departments, economic and urban development, at least to formalize, what we need to do to carry forward overall recovery with respect to boosting that, boosting some of the things that we had lost throughout the pandemic with respect to economic activity, and really focusing in on the small businesses and making those investments and incentives. There's been a lot of things that the city council has adopted, some of which is helped through the CARES Act, some of which been helped through other federal policy. We've been kind of continuing that on, and that's our trajectory. And hopefully with the plan's adoption here in the next couple of months, we'll be able to really take that to the next level and at least plan it out over increments of time, a year or 2 year period, something like that.
Okay, thank you,
Fred. One last thing. Sorry, Bob. I know we're short on time, but one thing that wasn't brought up was with regards to the affordable housing component of things. And I know that one thing that it's always tangentially related because we focus on current planning law or master planning from a land use perspective. But one thing that we're doing and dealing with here is housing our homeless population, and we've taken up numerous options for temporary shelters using our event space and almost building a temporary shelter over the course of a week. And it's been extremely challenging. And I know that there's a lot of people that are related to our community development and public works departments that are working closely on trying to deal with our homeless population as well. And that's something that's concerning to me going forward with regards to now that this $600, this extra $600 has run out, what's going to happen with regards to evictions and the increasing homeless population. And so something that we're keeping an eye on as well.
Good point. Thanks, Jeff. We touched on that earlier in our earlier conversations. Thank you for bringing that up. So now we're going to walk backwards, and it's the one kernel of information or your elusive thoughts that you'd like to share and leave with participants. So Marco?
Yeah, I collaborate. We need to work closer with our emergency managers, emergency management, health district, all levels of government. That's what it comes down to as we go forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Doug has left the meeting. Tim?
I think adaptability and innovation are key going forward. Our ability as a local government to adapt and be innovative in our processes. And I think you've heard a lot of that today. And so I think those are a couple key components as we look to the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sami?
I won't repeat anything that was said, so I'll create say a new topic. I think teamwork. I say teamwork internally, externally. I know during the initial stages of the pandemic, and still, I research what other jurisdictions are doing with regards to meetings, processes, whether or not they're open, looking at different ways to continually do business. And it's never done in a vacuum, and there's always the need for collaboration and teamwork in all actions that we do.
Thank you. That's a good point. Rod?
Again, I'm going to twist it up. Please go support your local small businesses. Spend your money.
That's a good plug for the local businesses, and we should all do that. Angela?
I think the takeaway for us has been use technology. I mean, I think most government agencies are so in the old school way of doing things. We have just tons of files that are stored somewhere in a storage unit that we can't get access to. I really wish we had scanned all that stuff, given access to the public, making all of our applications digital so that people don't have to come and physically hand, 10 hard copies of anything. Technology to get the word out to the general public about what we're doing. That's also been a problem. They use all these different Instagram and Facebook and tweeting, but there's a whole nother generation out there that doesn't know how to do any of that. So I wish there was a way for all of us to figure out how to get the word out to people that don't have access to technology. Same with the public meetings. A lot of people don't know how to use Zoom, and when they have to go to a public meeting through Zoom, it really scares them, and it's a turnoff, and it's really changed the way our development process looks, because we don't have 100 people coming to oppose a project anymore. We have 2 people that show up on a Zoom meeting and can't figure out how to get themselves off mute. So it's just completely changed the way we function anymore. Moving forward, I would say I wish we were better at using technology and helping the community to figure out how to also use technology.
Some good thoughts. Amy.
Thanks. I would say we need to continue to really pay attention to how we design our public spaces. We've talked about the importance of sidewalks, making sure there's plenty of space for people to be outside, be active, and still have that social distancing. So that goes for bike facilities, sidewalks, and our parks and all of our public spaces.
Thank you. And by the way, with your background, I can hardly wait for that stuff to sew up again.
It won't be long.
Jeff.
So all of them are good. So it's kind of hard to come up with a unique one. But I think in summarizing everybody's saying, don't be afraid to tackle the big challenges. Now's the perfect time to do it. We're all forcing ourselves to be innovative, to use technology, to work together. And since we're having these conversations on a regular basis, let's use each other to tackle some of these big issues that have been plaguing us for a long time. Tax structure, fiscalization of land use, things like that. Let's take this opportunity to get better.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to, hopefully the participants that dialed in, and I was glancing, there's quite a few of them. To me, it was a valuable session. I'm going to look forward to working with Jeff and Fred in the future to condense this and provide a presentation at the state conference. So I encourage you all to please sign up for that, because it's virtual. So heck, you can do it from the comfort of your home or the comfort of your office. I do want to extend my sincere appreciation to all the panelists. Those of you who participated earlier, and also those of you who do today, taking time out of your day and your busy work schedules to share your valuable insights with us. And I know that we'll be a better state, a better community, and a better organization for your insights. And I thank you much. Back to you, Fred.
Well, thank you, Bob. And again, my sincere thanks and appreciation for each one of our panelists. I know each one of you are very busy in your day-to-day activities and operations. And COVID-19, as we've hopefully learned today, has certainly added an extra little bit of zing to the work that we do on a daily basis. So we are, as the chapter and our attendees, very thankful for the time that you have given in preparation for today's meeting, as well as your participation in today's meeting. My big thanks to Bob for agreeing to moderate and keep us all on track and on time. And of course, my thanks to everyone who participated. As a reminder, this recorded video of this presentation and discussion will be posted within the next day or two on the chapter's YouTube channel. So in the next day or so, find that link, send it to your friends, send it to your colleagues. And if you have further questions or comments that you'd like to add to this discussion, feel free to email them to me, and I'd be more than happy to pass them along to our panelist participants and everyone that was involved today. So with that, thank you very much to everyone. For those of us in Northern Nevada and maybe even in Southern Nevada, if it's smoky, if it's hot, stay safe, stay out of it as best you can, and enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you very much.